feel like this video is as overdue as Marth is for winning CYL. So, is he truly a meme, or is he a hidden gem? Let's find out.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is going to talk about, well, the last CYL5 unit, and honestly, it's going to be an interesting video. I really didn't want to come from the point of view of pessimism or negativity, especially for those of you that like Marth, and technically, I mean, I like Marth as well. I'm pretty sure anyone who likes Fire Emblem has to like Marth. It's like a prerequisite if you care about the series overall. So I'm not going to come at you with this video telling you don't invest into Marth or he sucks. He does have some tough competition, and I did cover that in the general analysis, but I'm going to come from a point of view of exactly where he is unique and how he could potentially be very good in the future. But again, this is all kind of speculative. So as it stands, he's basically where I would put him, like as the TLDR of this, as like one of the best Red Sword infantries in the game right now. That's a bold statement, but remember, the game changes really fast. Power creep, as it's so-called, happens, and you're going to have either refines on red swords that could very well either meet his sort of niche or surpass him. But there's definitely some validity to investing into Brave Marth, and I'm going to be showcasing that throughout this video. So hopefully if you did pick him, you don't regret your decision, especially if you saw like all the other analysis or just, you know, voices in general telling you don't pick Marth. Because, well, yeah, there's tons of it. There's a lot of back and forth on this, and maybe the actual discussions and debates have died down a little bit, but generally speaking, I'm not going to come at you with this video telling you made a bad choice, because it's probably not true. Like with all CYL units, well, most of them, sorry Roy fans, most of them are pretty solid investments, even in the really long term. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover here. Before we begin, smash the like button, sub if you haven't already, and thank you for doing so. It helps out the channel, it helps me keep producing this content, which provides you with the information you need to succeed. All right, let's do this. So first up, we're going to talk about his actually, before we even talk about his stat spread and skills, which is what I normally do, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you guys and talk about the potential long-term viability of Marth. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to review all the old Hero Fests and just try to like pick up on certain patterns or ideas. Now keep in mind that nothing that's happened in the past necessarily will confirm what happens in the future, but it is something to look back at and be like, well, you know, what did those characters at those times do at their like time? Were they really good investments or not? And that's what I kind of want to look at here. So first up with the first year CYL, we're going to focus on the males here, but because like Marth is a male, and of course like both the support and carry potential of these units, right? So looking at this first CYL, we can undisputably say that Bike and Lancina are basically the best of this batch. Blazing Durandal went to Elwood, otherwise Roy himself would have been really good, but he shared it with his dad, and his dad took the spotlight among the resplendent stats he also got. Now Bike as a carry is still actually good to this day, and I think a lot of that power does come from Irvan, but also because I mean, he had a boost to his BST back then, and he's able to benefit from both a Resplendent and Dragon Flowers up to 20. So like all of this kind of puts him up to a place where he's still actually one of the best Green Axe infantries in the game. Now Lancina's a one-off support that you can basically get full value out of, and she's still really good. That's a good comparison to something like Marianne from this year's CYL, and how Marianne will likely still age really well with some utility or some uniqueness down the road. But if you were one of the people who basically were investing into Bike from year one, you definitely got your value out of it. Keep in mind though, and we're going to keep this in mind, Brave Ike was a first place male winner. Brave Roy was a second place male winner. Marth is a second place male winner, so just we gotta keep that in mind, okay? On this one, we have had the refines, of course, and Brave Hector went from literally nothing, like he absolutely wasn't relevant at all. He probably had some arena usage, but that was the extent of Hector here, and he came into relevancy with his Refine. So again, he kind of went from no one to someone pretty fast. And keep in mind the CYLs will get their Refines just in a matter of due time, which could definitely bring them into relevancy. We haven't really had a bad so-called CYL Refine. I wouldn't even call Lynn's bad by any means. I actually think it's really good if you wanted to use her as like a ranged tank, because it gives her 4 to all stats and dull effects, which are good. Now, the supportive or one-off from this particular CYL is like more debatable. I would probably argue that both Veronica and Celica are both very usable on low merges, and technically Hector is too, but he benefits from all stats from merges way more than someone like Veronica and Celica do, because Celica can be used as a really powerful Gale Force unit, and Veronica is essentially a very solid staple on defense teams, either because of her preference staff or because of her really good offensive stat spread for a healer at that time. So again, Hector became super relevant. He was a first place male winner. Despite what you might think, Ephraim is actually really good here, but the problem is he did get overshadowed by Hector, and he does have tough competition with a plethora of weaknesses. So we're talking about like Brave Ike just pretty much being better than Ephraim in a lot of ways, and Ephraim is still kind of screwed over by his armor weakness and just armor mobility, so he just really doesn't stand out here, unfortunately. Whereas Hector definitely went from a nobody to a somebody, and if you did merge up Hector for some reason back then you benefited from that. You probably could still use Ephraim if you invested into him, and he probably still gets the job done, but his competition, the fact that he had so much other Green Axe armors also kind of, I'm literally talking like Brave Edelgard here, kind of outclass him, and that is an issue, of course. Let's just continue on, because again, we don't want to focus too much on this, but it is important to this video and providing you perspective. So we're about to reach year 3 CYL3 refines, and if we kind of keep this like pattern going of first place male winners having like amazing refines and second place kind of being overshadowed, then you would assume that Alm just gets something amazing here, and he could definitely get something amazing if honestly his weapon gets distant counter. Then that's already a huge upgrade, because he's just going to become really good. Remove like the solo effect, or maybe double down on it, and it becomes like the best solo distant counter user in the game, which is a stark contrast to someone like Marth who wants his friends nearby. But essentially, there is a good way to make Alm really good here, and that could already outclass Marth if that happens. Just, you know, that's upcoming. In the same light, Elwood could get a really good refine that could potentially outclass Brave Erica, just to give you perspective. But if we go by that pattern, then Alm is probably set up for something good, and if you did invest into Alm and he ends up being some sort of carry, then you'll see that those merges and investment in Alm did pay off. In the same light, I would probably argue that Camilla and Micaiah are good as one-offs. If you're not planning to merge them, they have some supportive utility, or just something that makes them good in a team comp for particular roles, such as Camilla with Grav, or Micaiah with anti-armor, anti-cav, and just debuffs in general. So I hope you're kind of picking up on this. I don't want to make it like too obvious, but we're going with, you know, what exactly do you do with these CYL units that gets you that value, right? So here we are at the most recent CYL, not including 5. And again, if you invested hard into a carry like Brave Edelgard, you probably got your values worth and are going to continue getting your values worth. Ironically, someone like Claude pretty much got screwed over by Fatal Smoke. He's still usable, but, you know, that kind of hurt him a bit. And unfortunately, Brave Dimitri actually got really shut down by being a blue unit in the meta, along with like Brave Hector just kind of doing his job better, and his B skill lacking, like defense, damage reduction with a QR effect just isn't enough with that steady breath weapon when a bunch of DC refines have already gotten something really good out of it. So, but again, Brave Dimitri could get a solid refine. He was technically the first place winner of males, and we could see something amazing out of him in a year's time. So those that did invest in Dimitri could see something good. Now, honestly, the only like one-off here that might make sense would probably be Lysithea as some sort of like anti-cav or just PV type of unit, but again, that's whatever. So all in all, just looking back at the Hero Fest, right guys? If you are investing into Marth and merging him, there's a very solid chance that you are going to make him work and he's going to be one of your best units in the game, just looking back at old Hero Fests and the power of those refines. That is a long kind of argument to make, and it's very speculative, and I could be completely wrong, but it is something that is very important to consider and one of the strongest selling points to someone like Marth over the long term, because Hero Fests, CYLs, and just their longevity is there. It stays, and for the most part, besides some oddballs like Blazing Durandal and Elwood, you're probably going to get something out of it. Anyways, let's actually start talking about Marth himself and what I've come to conclude, because it's not all that bad. So his stat spread, very offensive, basically only lacking in res, but that can be overcome for the most part. And you'll see it's not that big of a deal. His very loaded weapons and special is necessary for him to stand out. But essentially it's got like everything in there. It's got like slaying, it's got 5 to all stats, and the more your team is buffed, you get all these ample effects like null follow-up, extra attack, healing, and vantage if you go like really good. You want to get all these effects active because that actually is what makes him stand out. The limiting condition is he needs to be within 2 spaces of at least a single ally for all of his weapon effects to work, and that is, in my opinion, the thing that basically is going to screw him over. But again, I'll go over why you can probably work around it. And of course his special, which basically sets up his weapon, but you want to set it up before you get into combat, if you ask me. You don't want to like rely on this to set up, but it gives him a lot of damage. It buffs up himself and his teammates, so that's again very good. It comes down to a 1-charge special due to slaying. This is all very synergistic, and at first glance I didn't really think the vantage is that important to using Marth, but I'll talk about in a moment why it is the defining factor for why you would use Brave Marth, because there's literally no other reason that I would think using any other Red Sword infantry would matter besides that vantage effect and the plethora of other effects he has among his weapon and special. So yes, the way you should look at this is actually with Special Spiral. So as long as you get this special charged and you keep firing it off with Special Spiral, which is again basically guaranteed with the Vantage Special Spiral loop, this is the thing that makes Marth different from every other Red Sword infantry. There is a huge benefit to this, which is that most like Hardy Bearings, Myogi Daggers, anything anti-Vantage has fallen out of the meta, and essentially Marth becomes pretty solid in fitting into like this tank carry vantage role, which is not found among any other unit, any other carry, and definitely not any Red Sword infantry. So this is where he's defined. But by dropping damage reduction in his B slot, he does become a lot more susceptible to certain problems, which again sucks. But this is what the importance of good allies will basically do for him. He needs an ally anyways within 2 spaces, and there's only really one ally that I would recommend, which isn't the Hero Fest right there, but rather Flame. Okay, I think it's absolutely necessary for you, if you're going to run Brave Marth, to have Flame. If you do not, then you probably shouldn't run Special Spiral. You probably shouldn't use Brave Marth because then he's not unique. But if you combine Flame with Special Spiral and his Vantage effects, then he becomes all these different type of roles that actually work really well. So the units that do hit through him, basically if he doesn't get a kill through Shining Emblem, or they have Hardy Bearing or Anti-Vantage, then he has that damage reduction intact, and he doesn't just instantly die. There's definitely characters that he's not going to one-shot, because they're just extremely bulky, or they have that Anti-Vantage effects, which again would kill him because he doesn't have damage reduction. That is the issue here, but the most important thing to consider with Marth is definitely trying to use him as some Vantage hyper carry tank. That is how I see him being used best, and how I would highly recommend using him in general. So with this in mind, you actually have 2 key components to make him like as perfect as possible. Flame for the damage reduction combined with Special Spiral, and Ashera for the anti-panic. This is probably very obvious, but it is exactly what you need to do to make Marth work, and I will back this up near the end. I'll show you, I'm not just like making this up. But essentially, you have these two key components, at least these 2 partners, and you have Marth with basically very solid matchups that will lead to tons of success. And I can't Can't stress this enough. Now, Mystic Boost isn't even really required in the CL slot, guys. But there is something I really appreciate out of that, which is the fact that Dazzling and Fire Sweep are still really annoying to him. So if you completely shut down staff users by using Mystic Boost, then they become far less annoying and it doesn't really matter to him. So that's why I would opt for Mystic Boost as a seal, but there is a secondary option, and that secondary option, in my opinion, is going to be just straight up Obstruct, as you can see here. So I have used Obstruct in the past with Ashnard, and this essentially will protect the allies behind you as long as you position correctly. So if a healer, like let's say, goes and like hits him then and gets danced, then they can't really circle around him. Now you lose out on the Mystic Boost kind of healing damage reducing effect, but generally speaking, because he needs to be near allies, Obstruct can allow better positioning situations. I think it's a good tech option and probably a very solid one once you add the merges and investment onto Marth, so that he doesn't maybe need Mystic Boost as much. Highly would consider this, as it would patch around his like within two spaces problem. The final thing to consider with Marth is just like a arena build. So I'm not going to go too much into this because I feel like AR is definitely his place. But essentially you could use him in Arena and you don't even need to change anything on his kit. The fact that he can use even Tempest and score maximum is really nice, because using like melee units in Arena is not always fun, but you could easily, just keep his base kit, and even Tempest will open up a lot more play options. He's a decent player phase unit because he has initiates combat condition as well, and he buffs a lot of his friends. So decent Arena unit. I don't necessarily think that's where you would ideally use him, but at least that's a nice boon. Finally, the most important thing to talk about is how exactly is Marth going to match up right now. So what I've done here is I've compiled some sims for the best case scenario versus the best case scenario for Marth, which is go max invest, plus 10 him, and don't even give him a seal. Assume you have either Mystic Boost or Obstruct. So nothing that gives him extra stats, but we use a special spiral condition here. It's pre-charged. He's running 4 mythics, which would be 3 in the main slots, and then 1 extra one for that extra HP and blessing overall. The particular mythics I've given him here are on Astra Season, being Altina, Naga, Plumeria, and Ashera. So those 4 are the ones that I think are fine, just to give them some variety in that stat spread. And on the enemy side, you'd have Cyros, Duma, and Mira. So again, the matchups I've chosen here are basically any meta threats that I feel he might struggle against, or just in general you might see quite often. So you have like a Max Felix over here with a defense IV. You're going to see Selena with a wind sweep, again max plus speed, same exact mythic conditions. We have Reinhardt with like ARD AD, which is again 10 attack, 10 defense, low attack res, attack defense solo, plus 10 plus attack. In fact, I didn't even add Resplendent to this, but that would be quite obvious as well. Other matchups you'll see here are Fallen Edelgard, Liv, Cyros. So again, common stuff you'll see. The surprise is actually better than I would have thought on first impression, and maybe it'll surprise you as well, which is he basically wins against everything, which is cool, like really good, really solid matchups. Now, I do think other Red Sword infantries actually also have this benefit. Like you could probably get Ira to do almost exactly the same thing, but there is a stark contrast, and that stark contrast is because of Vantage, you actually can just like one-shot a lot of these things from even doing damage to you. So for example, Cyros, because of the Dragon Effectiveness, Special Spiral, and just the special in general, just firing off at Cyros, even with her damage reduction in Dragon Wall, he just one-shots and doesn't take damage, as long as she's not running Hardy Bearing, of course. And like same idea with someone who's oppressive, like Liv, who actually goes through damage reduction. So he doesn't even get a chance to hit with like 72 attack with piercing damage reduction is like really not something you want to take. The matchup you see here with Selena is actually because she just gets the wind sweep off, she outspeeds him. That can be worked around with like speed boosting in some form, so you can use like Tamari to debuff Selena on the enemy team, or you could run more drive speeds or run a speed IV, though I would opt for a plus attack with this style. And finally stuff like literally plus defense, 44 defense Felix, not dying and not even doing much damage to Marth in general. Reinhardt definitely chunks quite a bit, but that's a max Reinhardt, right? That's like literally the top Reinhardt you run into. Some of this is obviously going to be very difficult for Marth because like through multiple combats he will die, But like I said, if you account for the Vantage killing a lot of things in one shot, and Reinhardt is the only one that actually survives, then this actually becomes a situation where he just sweeps the whole team with Vantage, and then Reinhardt is the only one that actually survives a hit and then is able to do damage to Marth, which makes it pretty good as a potential carry. As I mentioned before, weaknesses like Flash and the lack of Null Seed Disrupt definitely suck, and then he doesn't really stand out much. But if you use them in a certain way against teams that don't have this, or have some sort of point where you can exploit not getting hit by stuff like Flash, or Dazzling doesn't do much, then Marth ends up doing a pretty solid job of carrying, especially against the worst of the worst case scenarios, against tons of strong blue units, or meta threats in general. So yeah, that's a long one, guys. I hope I gave you Marth fans your due diligence and didn't completely... Maybe this isn't what you expected. It's definitely not what I expected. But there's definitely weaknesses here, and hopefully you'll be happy with your investment in Marth. It's definitely more like I feel better about doing this as well, and yeah, Fire Emblem. All right, that's it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. As always, smash the like button, sub if you haven't already. If you love this content, you want to keep see it coming, consider supporting on Patreon, description below. Yeah, love you guys. Thank you so much. Peace.
It's over.